All right. Welcome everybody to the Power of Image. Today's presentation is on race and hip hop with our guest professor and author of You Mean There's Genius in My Hip Hop, Dr. Frederick Gooding, Jr. This presentation is being recorded and will be added to Anaheim Public Library's YouTube channel, so we ask you to mute your mics until questions. Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr.'s Image Project explores race in a variety of cultural contexts. This media literacy program helps us become better media consumers, exercising critical thinking skills. Frederick W. Gooding Jr. is an associate professor within the Honors College at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, and goes by Dr. G in this venue. He critically analyzes race within mainstream media, and one of his strengths is contextualizing problematic patterns based on their historical roots. Welcome, Dr. G. Thank you for taking time to unpack hip hop for us and how it intelligently, insightfully, and inspirationally addresses racism and exposes hypocrisy. Why don't you walk us through this?
Absolutely. Good evening, Joe, and thank you to the Anaheim Public Library for opening up this space for continued dialogue. I think that the only way we can move forward together is if we come together, and dialogue, I think, is the first step towards us understanding one another. And so I'm going to go ahead and just get right into it. The idea is that, pardon the expression, but I firmly believe that hip hop gets a bad rap. So what do I mean? The fact of the matter is that there are indeed narratives out there about hip hop that I think are indeed justifiable. But what I'm suggesting in today's conversation is that actually much of what we're criticizing is actually not hip hop, right? And so just to give you a preview, much of the misogynistic, materialistic, and even some of the violent, what I would call mayhem that we see associated with this type of genre is actually derived from rap music, because rap music is more commercialized, commodified version. But hip hop, in its truest and purest sense, is something so much more fundamental. All righty, so here's what we're going to do. We're just going to simply have a conversation whereby we'll talk about where hip hop came from, and then talk about where hip hop is and how it can be actually used as a very powerful tool for critical thinking. And just by fair warning, this presentation does contain a bit of strong language and themes, but what we'll walk through is this idea that there is a larger purpose to much of what we're about to hear. So, all right, here's the situation. We simply want to start off by asking ourselves, where does hip hop come from? And I think it's a fundamental question that we shouldn't overlook, because if I were to ask you, does hip hop come from the beaches of Malibu? What would you tell me? Right? Most likely no, right? This is beautiful, of course, we all agree, but this is not where hip hop came from, okay? And so hip hop came from a very specific place in a very specific point in time. And that's what we want to talk about. So in terms of where did hip hop come from, we can simply say that hip hop obtained its birthplace in South Bronx, New York, in the late 70s, early 80s. And so the idea is that when you look at this picture, I think it's quite evident that there's some difficulties in this neighborhood. I know it's in black and white, but you can look up on your own on Google, Jimmy Carter visits South Bronx, right, in the 1970s, right, where President Jimmy Carter went to visit. And you'll see with your own eyes that it's hardly recognizable as a place with what we would call America, right? I mean, it looks almost as if it's some war-torn country, that we would consider third world or what have you. I mean, but there are indeed people living in this neighborhood. And so who are these people and why are they living in this neighborhood and why are they living this way? Well, that's what I want to talk about a little bit, because we must understand the root of hip hop before we continue with any critique of hip hop. right? In terms of contextualizing where this genre came from, okay? So this is how the party got started, right? Because mind you, if we're saying that this neighborhood is filled with mostly Black and brown individuals, well, the question is, did Black and brown people just move to the city when they first immigrated over? And how did they get to an inner city urban area like this, like South Bronx? Well, let's just go back to the very beginning. This is how the party got started. This is how people that I'm related to first came to this country, right? Not willingly, not in search and pursuit of an American dream, but as captives, right? And we don't want to overlook this little detail, right? And for those of you who are interested in more about this, you can look up the 1619 Project with the New York Times, right? So in 1619, that's when the first recorded shipment of enslaved individuals arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. And so when you look at me, you might think, oh, wow, that's just a strapping gentleman with beautiful curly hair. And you may be correct on that. But I'm also a living descendant of the survivors of the era of enslavement. I have to say it like that to remind you, because I don't forget. I don't forget. But that's where I came from. My people were bound in chains and forced to do what? Work for somebody else for the entirety of their lives with not an iota of personal profit? Isn't that fundamentally antithetical to the whole principle of a capitalistic free market economy? I mean, think about it. For those of you who are listening right now, can you imagine going into work tomorrow and then showing up the day after that and showing up the day after that, only to work for somebody for no pay? The thought is unfathomable. And this is with you being dressed in comfortable clothing, maybe jeans perhaps. But the idea of you just working for somebody perpetually without any pay, of course not. So can you imagine what it would be like to do that, where your whole life existence is warped and framed around serving somebody else, and you're tortured if you don't comply? It's horrible. It's embarrassing. It's a dark chapter. So unfortunately, we don't talk enough about it. But I just wanted to be mindful about, this is where the party started. This is where people like me came from. And so why is that important? Well, because, okay, well, Dr. G, we don't have enslavement anymore. You're right. And I don't want to dwell on the past, okay? You're right about that. But however, let's talk about this idea of when my people became free. So as you see on your screen, we have our 16th president. He goes by the name of Honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln, and he is known for doing what? You guessed it, freeing the slaves. So just real quick history lesson. He did not free a single goddamn soul, excuse my French. So he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, that is true, in 1863, but it was symbolic. It was a military field order that had no application to the Confederate States of America that had seceded from the Union, had their own capital, and had their own president and their own monetary system. I mean, it's the equivalent of if, legislators in Vietnam all of a sudden decreed, tomorrow, every American who works for the Anaheim Library, gets a Tesla. I know our host, Joe Pertel, would appreciate that, but guess what, party people? It's not happening. What they say in Vietnam has no bearing on us here in America. They're their own sovereign, just as we are. So the same principle applies. The Emancipation Proclamation had no legal bearing. Secondly, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, there was still slavery in northern states such as Delaware and Maryland. So in essence, he did not free a single soul. But moving right along, after the Civil War, as you may know, enslavement was formally ended with the passage of the 13th Amendment. What does this have to do with hip hop? Be patient. We're just setting it up, right? We're just setting it up, right? It's kind of like, when you go to a play, the overture, right? When they play the music and hit that, what's about to come, and then the musical hits. That's what we're doing. We're just warming it up, the overture. So here's the deal. We do away with enslavement. And if you're really curious, you can watch the documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay that really goes a little more in depth about the limitations and the loophole in that idea of us officially ending enslavement. That's not the point right now. The point is that my people were free, but not equal. The picture tells you. One person is standing, the other is kneeling. One person is fully clothed, one barely clothed. They're not even looking each other in the eyes. And one person has chains on, and the other does not. So while the quote unquote Black man in this picture might be free, clearly they're not equal to the white man. And so why is that important? Well, that's important because I had hinted at this idea of the 13th Amendment, the loophole. If you read very carefully, I mean, it's hard to read this writing, is hard to read, but it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, where the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States of America. So, okay, here's the deal. Slavery nor involuntary servitude will not exist in the United States of America. That's what it's saying. But the parenthetical, as you can read, is except as punishment for a crime where the party has been duly convicted. So here's the loophole. And again, you can check out the Ava DuVernay documentary. What happened was Black people like me in the free society instantly became criminalized. So let me explain. You have these things called the Black Codes that were immediately instituted in the aftermath of the Civil War. And what's so important about the Black Codes is that this was a mechanism by which Southern states were able to attempt to retain the society that they once knew in terms of keeping the Negro in his place. I mean, this is literally what they would say. And so let's just, I'm using shorthand, but say, for example, on Monday, there was enslavement. Tuesday, the 13th Amendment comes down. On Wednesday, what happens? Well, on Wednesday, you still have these plantation lands that still need to be worked. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's free. Now, all of a sudden, these plantation owners have to pay for labor. Oh man, this sucks. I'm here, I'm making a killing, I'm making a profit on Monday. Now, all of a sudden, on Wednesday, I have to pay for labor. Are you kidding me? I have to pay for my employees? What? Health benefits? Get out of here. Aflac. Okay, so that's that part of the equation. These plantation lands still need to be worked. But the other part of the equation is on Wednesday, all of a sudden, you create these laws. So on Monday, it was illegal for Blacks to learn how to read and write. It was illegal. Tuesday, we do 13th Amendment. On Wednesday, what do? We pass a law that says anyone who doesn't have a job and is unable to read and write needs to go to jail because they're a vagrant. Ding, ding, ding. Well, guess what happens? So all of a sudden, on Thursday, we're able to round up all these Black vagrants who don't have jobs or unable to read and write. They go back to jail. So remember what we said. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude is legal except as punishment for a crime where the party has been duly convicted. So they fabricated these laws, trumped up charges essentially, and they started arresting Blacks en masse. And so the convict lease system is what came out of this, whereby now because I'm arrested and I've been duly convicted, I now have to work off my sentence, my debt to society. So then all of a sudden on Thursday, when I was arrested on Wednesday, right, for being a vagrant, now on Thursday, the jail would—
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you please repeat what you said?
No, Siri, I cannot. I'm in the middle of a presentation. Okay, so the bottom line is that on Thursday, the jail would lease me out to the plantation that I had left on Monday, right? And so that was the convict lease system. It was a win-win scenario, win-win lose, that is. Win for the plantation owner in terms of now getting free labor again. But then it was a win for the judge because many judges would get a kickback, but it was a lose, obviously, for the Black individual. So I say that to say that we've now created a culture whereby Blackness is criminalized. Blackness is now demonized. Think about how it was a failed Reconstruction era that only lasted a flitting 12 years. 1865 to 1877. And then in the aftermath of that, you now have this wave of Negrophobia that now takes the sweep, particularly the South, but the nation in general. I mean, here is a picture of what we believe to be one of the largest recorded attended lynchings Paris, Texas, 1893. And the reports are up to 19,000 people. 19,000 people. I mean, think about if you're watching, I mean, the last time you've been to a basketball game, I mean, there's probably less than 19,000 people in the arena, in the stands, all to see an extrajudicial killing. Remember, I mean, lynching, they were not prosecuted by law. I mean, there was no judge, jury. No, it was just executioner, right? And if you don't believe me, there's a MacArthur scholar winner. His name is Brian Stevenson. And again, if you can go to your Anaheim Public Library, you can find the book. It's called Just Mercy. And he talks about his work with the Equal Justice Initiative. And EJI has documented over 4,000 lynching cases. And you can see some of the reasons as arcane as a Black man knocking on the wrong door, or a Black man brushed up against a white female while trying to catch a train and being killed as a result. And so let's not also forget how it permeated mainstream culture, right? This is a postcard. So now we're talking about the federal government, right? I mean, even now, I mean, I think that there's, I know that there's decency laws. For example, you can't send a pornographic magazine in the mail without just somebody exposed. You can't do that. But what's fascinating is they somehow delivered these postcards, wish you were here. So here's my point. My point is, before we even get to hip hop, we have to understand the history behind how the people who created hip hop were treated and what would push them and prompt them to find hip hop as an outlet. So bear with me, we're gonna get to the hip hop, but you must understand, these are the chapters of our history books that we somehow skim over. And I'm not pointing a finger at any of you. I'm a university professor right now. I teach in the honors college, where the average SAT score is over 1,400, average ACT score is over 31. These kids are smart, but guess what? They don't know a lick about anything that I'm talking about right now. That's a travesty. That's a travesty. And so what we need to know is that this was normal. This was part. So again, oh, I wasn't there. I didn't lynch the person. Okay, I get it. But you lived in a society that distributed pictures like this through the mail. I'm not even going to bore you with the details about how people would mutilate the corpses, taking off fingers, toes, of course, genitalia. I don't know about you, but I don't really have much of a need for a rotting toe in my kitchen, right? I just a rotting black, just deteriorating flesh, and I don't have much need for that. But this is the culture. 1900, not that long ago. Not that long ago. Not that long ago. Not that long ago. When you look at the faces of indifference on the left-hand side, it's not that long ago. And as of the time of this recording, you know that the trial is ongoing right now. And if you can, email me, but I can find no reason or excuse or justification for Derek Chauvin's behavior that fateful day against George Floyd. I'm just sorry. I can't. So the point that I want you to bear in mind before we move on to the hip hop is that racism against African Americans in particular, Black, Indigenous people of color, but African Americans in particular, is what I call, it's actually psi racism. It's structural. It's been historically sustained. Again, I didn't even bore you with the idea of, in the neoliberal era, redlining practices, restrictive covenants, lending practices, just neighborhoods. You can read Color of Law by Cass Nelson. You can read up on some of these other books, I'm sure, from your local Anaheim Public Library. But it's historically sustained. It wasn't just a group of hillbillies being mean to Black people. No, this is by law. Especially when you look at like the war on drugs, this idea of law and order. I mean, you should look at it. I mean, Lee Atwater, many of them admitted in the aftermath that this war on drugs was absolutely racially focused, right? The 100-to-1 sentencing ratio, I'm not even going to talk about all that right now. But I just want us to understand that this type of racism is novel. it's unlike anything we've seen in any other country before. Historically sustained, cyclical, right? Cyclical. And what I mean by like, it's like water is that, think about the high water mark of 1964, the Civil Rights Act. Oh my dear Lord, what could be better? What is more revolutionary than a Civil Rights Act? Title VII, I now can sue for monetary damages. But look, fast forward 50 years later, EEOC still has a backlog of 70,000 cases. Many people still suffer on the job from racial discrimination. And obviously you saw with the Derek Chauvin piece, how, we still have some work to do. And so in other words, when I say it's like water, while it sounds a little dystopian and it sounds pessimistic, it also sounds like the truth from someone who lives the experience, right? So if you haven't lived the experience, I would caution you to be patient in listening to others who tell you, despite many encouraging policy changes, after a while, it's amazing how racism, like water, takes the shape of its container. So you come up with new policies and then racism somehow finds a way to manifest itself, right? Over time. And again, not to do a shameless plug, but you can read about it in my other book, American Dream Deferred, Black Federal Workers in Washington, D.C. from 1941 to 1981. And what I show is how there were numerous forward-thinking policies to eliminate and eradicate racism within the federal workplace. But still, over time, that 40-year period, what was consistent was that Blacks still suffered disproportionately from lower wages and slower raises. Facts, despite all the policy changes, right? And I know it sounds pessimistic, but at the same time, if you do the research, it might also sound like the truth. Lastly, institutional. We talked about the post service. This idea that the racism, it was just normal. It's just the air that people breathe, right? It was just woven into the fabric and the pattern and practice of how daily affairs were conducted. So we must bear this in the back of our minds when we think about where did hip hop come from. So when we talk about solution, I think it's a fair question, this idea of, well, what do you do? What do you do if you're in this situation and you're not being treated properly? Your Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, is not really doing anything. Your local legislatures, you've made the phone calls, you've written your letters, you've gone to the town halls. I mean, nothing's really happening. What do you do? Well, what I'm suggesting to you is that these marginalized, disaffected, and oppressed people looked within, and they used their powers of creation to not only create a genre of hip hop, but to create a larger community that has become rather supportive in recognizing each other's humanity. So allow me to explain. Okay, so what I'm going to explain is that there are actually a number of components at play that comprise the world of hip hop. More specifically, there are what we call 5 elements that comprise hip hop. And notice, as I'm talking, just compare how many of these elements that you see manifested on songs you hear on the radio, right? Remember, we talked about how rap music was the more commercialized, commodified version. But think about the elements I'm talking about right now and whether you actually see those manifested on the radio. Sometimes, because rap music is, very similar, right? So many people get confused. But in essence, hip hop is doing something quite different. And so I'd like to walk through these 5 elements and explain their significance before we land the plane in terms of, why we perhaps should consider hip hop from a different angle. So the first element is the DJ or DJing. I mean, after all, what's a party without music? I mean, it's just a gathering, right? So first of all, let's not overlook the genius behind how people used music as a connective tool to bring other individuals together. I mean, think about it. When you talk about a city like New York, there's actually quite a fair amount of diversity, right? You have different people coming from different locations and whatnot, but sometimes it may be difficult in terms of different foods, different languages, different accents, right? I mean, and I'm only going off what I know because my queen, my wife of 24 years, she's from the South Bronx. And so her family still lives there and we visit quite frequently. And so this is going off just what I see and know. So music is this universal component. I mean, think about how there may be some songs that you like where the lyrics are in a foreign language. You may not understand exactly what they're saying, but somehow the melody, the rhythm, it still strikes you and speaks to you. That's the power of music, right? It's universal in that respect. So the DJ is the individual who brings everybody together. So here's what's amazing. I'm going to explain really briefly. You see how there's like two circles that the DJ has? Those are called turntables, okay? Now here's what's so amazing about this. You may take this for granted, like you've seen this person with headphones on before. Okay, whatever, big deal. No. Time out. Let me explain. So what's amazing and innovative and absolutely worthy of more praise is this idea that the DJ was very perceptive. I mean, after all, the point of a party is you want to keep the vibe moving. You want to keep people on the dance floor. That's the mark of a good DJ. And you have to keep it going. You have to, it's almost like a formula. You have to select songs that maybe bleed into the next songs that are kind of related. And so that way, you keep that energy going out in the dance floor. So these perceptive people, so you have to watch body language, literally. So these perceptive people notice that there were certain parts of a song where people seem to just groove just a little bit harder. That was called the break. And the reason why people were grooving a little bit harder during the break was because that's the part of the song where typically there's less vocalization and more instrumentation. And again, we're talking about songs in the 70s when people used to really sing, right? Not auto-tune. Okay, so the idea is that they came up with this phenomenal idea. Oh, okay. So they would buy the same song, 2 records of the same song. And remember, they had the technology that they had was they just had a record turntable. But I don't know who, but they came up with this idea of I'm going to attach 2 turntables together, 2 record players together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play that part where it's just the instrumentation on record A. And I have my headphones on, and while that it's like maybe 30 seconds or 40 seconds, while that part is playing on record A, I'm going to cue up that exact same space on record B. And then I have my headphones on. And so the idea is that as soon as A is about to end that 40-second period, I then, with my crossfader, move over to record player B, and I play the exact same clip. So what is happening is the DJ now has the ability to loop. They can go back between record A, record B all night long if they wanted to in terms of playing that juicy 40-second clip where it's just instrumentation. They could extend that for as long as they want. So in other words, you're talking about the individual who's limited in resources, no formal education, no access to opportunity, but yet they figured out how to manipulate time and space. Wow. And again, if you don't think that's impressive, then you do me a favor. You go home, you put 2 of your iPhones together, and you tell me what new technology you can come up with, right? Right? No, because think about it. They saw the record, but saw beyond that one record player. I mean, I've yet to hook. I can barely hook up, my extended screen, and it's made just for my computer to have 2 screens talk. I can barely do that, let alone just take something random, and put 2 together to create something new. No, we must recognize that for the genius that it is. And that's an example of what we call scratching, moving back and forth between the 2 turntables. Not easy to do. Next is the emceeing. So this is what we often think about when we think about hip hop music. We think about that one person with the microphone in their hand. And so the function of the MC is literally to move the crowd, right? And so what started off as, first it was just the DJ playing music, and then after a while, they would ask a couple of their buddies to get on the mic and, provide directions. People over here, wave your hands. People over there, go side to side, right? So they would do these directions. And then after a while, the guy in the mic was like, wait a minute, I have a mic in my hand, that's power. I'm Sean T, and I'm here to say, I love everybody and I love to play, right? So all of a sudden, it became much more intricate as far as people then being able to insert themselves, over the music, that everybody was gathered for. And so then it ends up developing to something like this.
Feature, who am I? The MC. When you need to rock your 3,000 seat arena, best believer, who am I? The MC.
And so look how the MC is the focal point of the crowd's energy. You try it at home. It's not easy to do, to move around while you're speaking and to have people so animated because they're excited about what you're saying. Maybe you're saying something that's important enough. Maybe you're saying something that's universal enough. You're saying something that's penetrating enough. Let's not overlook these details, right? This is not a concert where you're just watching. No. Hip hop is known for generating this type of energy. Like, I'm feeling what he's saying and I'm excited. You saw all those hands. And so that's the function of the MC. Very difficult. We shouldn't overlook what they're doing. They're creating community. B-boy, B-girl. The B in B-boy and B-girl stands for break, as in break dancer. Remember, we talked about this. The break was that part of the song, the juiciest part of the song, right? And again, I think what we want to give credit to is, in the whole history of humankind, when did we ever see people spin on their heads for fun? This is completely original. And I think what it speaks to is how the music, the vibration, the genre, the collective feel. Look at all these people in the crowd, right? I mean, look, underneath these people who are doing this acrobatic move, as you see on your screen, this idea that people are so motivated to move their bodies in this way. I think that's what's compelling about this. Just take a look for yourself. Totally, utterly ridiculous. And notice, this is the international championships all the way in Germany, right? In terms of this being worldwide now. They say some of the greatest breakdancers have never even left the borders of China. In terms of, this is truly a global phenomenon that's making in excess of $10 billion annually. So you may not listen to hip hop, but a lot of people are. Next, we have number 4, we have graffiti, or what we now prefer to say street art. Graffiti has this negative connotation that you're destroying property. But let me frame it to you like this. So, look at this wall. They're destroying property. Okay, so talk to me about Mount Rushmore. Who gave who permission to carve faces on the side of the mountain? I know the Sioux tribe didn't necessarily, it's a point of contention. In the Black Hills, if you go to South Dakota, I mean, that's not graffiti in terms of, right? Teddy Roosevelt was here. Oh, no, that's different. Oh, okay, I mean, you're right. It's even larger and bigger in size and proportion. I mean, at least I could paint over this wall. It's not like I can go back and put the mountain back the way it was. But here's the other part of it. That's graffiti on the street. Okay, so here's the deal. What if you lived in a neighborhood where there were no parks? It's just, there is no art. What do you do if there is no canvas for you? Well, you create a canvas. And think about how, and here, bear with me, you can't have it both ways. You can't tell me Banksy is this brilliant street artist, but yet when poor Black and brown people tag up a wall, all of a sudden they're property destroyers. Which one is it? Like, now it's kind of in vogue now, but especially when it first started. So 2 more points. One is, if anything, we might want to look at it from a different angle as far as street art being people reminding us about their humanity. I live here. I see billboards all everywhere I go telling me to buy McDonald's and, here's my liquor stores and check cashing. So it's okay for capitalists to advertise ways to take my money, even though I'm poor. But then if I want to say something like Sean T was here, all of a sudden that's property destruction. I'm the one who's living here. The people who are advertising it don't live in my neighborhood. And so this is a way of reclaiming space. I mean, maybe I would enjoy art in a gallery if I had an art gallery, but there aren't any art galleries in the hood, in the South Bronx, as you saw, right? I mean, so think about how so many of us live these structured lives. I mean, if you live in a nice bucolic suburban neighborhood, then you're able to drive to the local art museum, take your family, pay the admission. You're not even thinking about the admission. It's $10 a piece. It's like, whatever, right? You have lunch there. Totally different experience, same planet, different worlds. So that's B. C is, let's not just overlook the artistry involved. Look at what you see on your screen. I would be hard pressed to do this with colored pencils, let alone with the spray can. You know how they bleed if right? Look how thin the lines are. I mean, it looks like it's 3-dimensional. Oh my God, this is so incredibly complex. This person who did this is not an idiot. That's the point. Clearly, the individual who did this is not an idiot. Clearly, they're thinking. Clearly, they're creative. Clearly, they have talent. They just didn't get a 1400 SAT, so they're not in honors college partying with me at this school, if you understand what I'm saying. And so this goes to another critique I have, where I constantly say the cure for cancer is somewhere in the ghetto, but we're never going to find it because that individual is just not going to have access to the labs. Brilliant as can be, but they just don't have access. Lastly is this idea of knowledge of self. And this is the key ingredient that separates and distinguishes hip hop from commercialized, commodified rap music. So it's not to say that hip hop is perfect, because it's human made. But if we're gonna come up with a list of people that we need to criticize and chastise for being misogynistic, before you criticize hip hop, I think you need to criticize their bigger brother, Hollywood. Hollywood is producing misogyny and violence, I believe, on a daily, if not nightly basis. I mean, what is The Bachelor about? Really? I have 30 women competing for one man's love? But it's sanitized, it's glossy, it's glamorous. But I mean, just think about the premise of that show, right? I mean, we want to see violence, again, just turning your television right now. You're going to see plenty of violence. So in Hollywood, as you know, I think has a longer track record as far as going back to the 1920s. So the idea that hip hop came on the scene, and now hip hop is the scourge of all evil, and I just want to be careful about scapegoating. Hip hop is open to criticism, rightfully so. I didn't say it's above critique or rebuke, but at the same time, let's just be consistent. So everything you have to say about hip hop, make sure you say about Hollywood, if not louder. That's all I'm saying. But back to the program. The point is that knowledge of self is the key ingredient. And so if you know where to look and listen, you'll find that so many of these hip hop songs actually speak to individuals trying to navigate and survive. Let's not forget what we talked about the first opening slides. You're free, but you're not equal. I mean, even now, read the news. Stories that come out like this break my heart. Interracial couple, the husband was white, the wife was black, and they were moving. This is a true story. And they had a home appraisal because they're moving. The wife was home, the black wife was home. The number came in at like $300,000. They looked at the comps, and like, it feels kind of low. So they did it again, this time with the white husband there by himself. You know where the story is going, but unfortunately, it's a true story, and there are true costs to this. As in, would you believe the difference between the two appraisals was over $100,000? Not 1,000. And I think 1,000 is significant. I think if any of you's watching right now, you really like the book and you just want to donate $1,000 to me because you think I'm cool, I'm absolutely going to take it. $1,000 is significant. I didn't say 10,000. I didn't even say 50,000. I said $100,000. That's happening today. So in many ways, the difficulties are still in front of us in terms of navigating for race. And so these hip hop songs that speak to ways in which people can stay mentally fit, stay positive, and still figure out ways to navigate a system that does not appear to be consistent. That's the key ingredient that's missing.
I ain't trying to argue. Sometimes I wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for you. Hip hop, you the love of my life, and that's true. When I was handling the shit I had to do, it was.
So I remember late night steady rocking the mic, hip hop, you the love of my life, and it's true. So that's probably, I mean, everything that I'm saying is probably giving you an insight or a glimpse as to why someone like this would say something like that. And by the way, that was Tariq Black from The Roots. You might recognize The Roots from playing accompanying music on the Jimmy Fallon show. And so you see them on TV and you're like, haha, this is great. But they actually got started in Philadelphia as hardcore rappers, but it was just so hard, underground rappers, but it was just so hard for a group of 9 to stay employed that they took on this gig with Jimmy Fallon thinking it would give them the exposure. But if you are interested, try looking up Black Thought. And his real name is Tariq, but look up Black Thought and you'll see that this is a gifted poet, an absolutely gifted poet. And so if, you know, sometimes I don't think I would have made it if it wasn't for you. Hip hop, you the love of my life, and it's true. And so this knowledge of self, you can see where people feel indebted, right? When the system doesn't care about me, when there's no one, I mean, think about it. The George Floyd trial. I mean, you hear with your own eyes. People had to call the police on the police. Do you know how bizarre that is? Just think about that. If you're in a scenario where you're watching with your own eyes in disbelief, this depraved indifference to human life, and you have to call the police on the police, where else do you go? Sometimes I wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for you. Hip hop, you the love of my life, and it's true. Why should I call on the cops first? Why should I lean and depend on the cops when they may be the source of my pain? Again, it may not be true for you, but it doesn't mean that it's not true for someone else. We just want to be mindful of that. So those are the 5 elements. Again, the DJing, the emceeing, the breakdancing, the street art, and your knowledge of self. And so where does this lead us? The bottom line is that hip hop is a very powerful source that recycles and rehabilitates humankind, human matter that has been discarded as waste. I mean, here you're looking at this picture, it's horrible to see waste in our beautiful ocean like this. But what we're saying is that hip hop and those elements are an organized response to these destructive, systemic, or cultural, cyclical and institutionalized forces, the side racing we talked about, right? And so the essential idea is that hip hop helps foster new life through the generative power of creation. So I believe in my studies that hip hop is truly as wide and deep as the ocean, right? Truly as wide and deep as the ocean. And I think that when we talk about the benefits of hip hop, I think Angela Duckworth wrote a book about it. It was called Grit. Became a national New York Times bestseller. Grit. That's nothing new. This is what hip hop has been doing the whole time. When you make something out of nothing, you're keeping it real, honesty being the best policy. Bye haters. I don't have time for people who are being negative, right? Cash rules everything around me. That's what we mean by cream. This idea that if anybody believes in the American dream, it would be people who believe in hip hop. This idea that I'm not going to go to corporate America. I'm not going to have you tell me to cut my hair a certain length and dress a certain way. No, I'm going to live my life. I'm going to dress the way I want to. And guess what? There's a market out there that will support me. That's what's so phenomenal when you look at someone like a Jay-Z. Yes, he's a household name now, but don't forget, he started off selling drugs in the street. Why? He had cracks in his palm because he couldn't find a job anywhere. And so he leveraged the money from drug dealing. I didn't say it was good to deal drugs, but he leveraged that money from drug dealing because he was talented into a music career. Did you know that Jay-Z, most of his songs are freestyle? He doesn't write down any of his rhymes. That sounds kind of gifted to me. You're just gonna go, you're gonna listen to a song and then just, and here he is on his way to becoming a billionaire, all from a market that he created. He didn't apply for a job. Cash rules everything around me. How empowering is that? And this idea in hip hop that you have to pay your dues. This idea that, listen, you just can't go on stage. I'm not going to give you my hard-earned money if your skills are not crafted, if you're not practicing, if you're not taking the craft seriously. And so only respect is given to those who are serious about their ability to create, right? Within underground circles. So you might call it hip hop music, but it's not hip hop music. That stuff you hear in the radio, many underground true hip hop believers, they scorn that stuff that you hear in the radio, auto tunes and check me out and check out my chain. No, the idea is that many people who practice hip hop are trying to survive and find meaning in this thing called life. And think about how hip hop has so very powerfully recycled that which is discarded, right? It says, for those of you who read the Bible, it's the rejected stone that will serve as the keystone for my new kingdom, right? And so think about cardboard boxes. Remember I was talking about this idea of spinning on your head? Like what would make you want to do that? Well, again, you're taking what is normally to be trash, cardboard boxes, and you put it on the concrete surface so you're not damaging yourself, right? That's absolutely innovative. Or the badge of honor for a DJ, this idea that you have your records and the crates. And think about this, in the inner city, urban USA, this idea that milk crates will be discarded on the side, no one's using them. No, this is a perfect way for me to transport my records from party to party. Now, everything is done via computer mostly, but for those who still practice the craft, that was a badge of honor, right? Pulling up in your vehicle and having you and your boys take the records out, the crates into the venue, right? So again, recycling, repurposing. Not to mention, hip hop recycles and repurposes people. You all may have heard of Lil Nas X in that Can't Nobody Tell Me Nothing, right? You may have seen him in Doritos commercials and things of that nature. But what if I told you before he had this hit song, he was broke, like no joke, busted, disgusted, could not be trusted, sleeping on his sister's couch. He was confused and abused. It was just not looking good. Then what does he do? He samples a rock song in excess, right? He samples a rock song, that's the beat. And then who is he now? He's a Grammy award-winning artist living his best life because part of his confusion was he was living in the closet all that time. Now, no one can tell him nothing, literally. He doesn't have to answer anybody. He is free. Wow. Through the power of his words, he was able to create his own world. He is free. He's financially free, and he's also psychologically free. He doesn't have to hide anymore. Hip hop allowed him that. Not corporate America, not our educational system. Hip hop did this for this young man. And that's what we need to look at and more carefully and recognize. So in other words, if anything, I think I would like to say thank you to hip hop, because while I understand it's more than just noise or a beat, that's insulting. I now understand hip hop to be a powerful, poignant, and poetic expression of humanity, dignity, and respect. Isn't that what we all want? What's so complicated about that? So in closing, I just want to leave you with an example. How are we going to talk about hip hop, not listen to hip hop? I gave you little snippets, but let's listen to.
This album is dedicated.
Let's listen to just the beginning portion of one of hip hop's more famous songs. It's by Biggie Smalls, AKA Christopher Wallace, who's no longer with us. He was killed tragically and prematurely. But the fact of the matter is, this person was gifted. I just really wish, it would have been awesome to see him as a poetry professor at my university, just in terms of his ability to work with words. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play for you the beginning of one of his famous tracks. It's called Juicy. And the premise of Juicy is it talks about how he started off with nothing and made himself into something, right? But I just want you to listen very carefully to the beginning of the song, okay?
This album is dedicated to all the teachers that told me I never amount to nothing. To all the people that lived above the buildings that I was hustling from that called the police on me when I was just trying to make some money to feed my daughter. And all the niggas in the struggle, you know what I'm saying? It's all good, baby.
Okay, let's review. This is dedicated. He mentioned 3 groups of people. We'll go last first. To all the N-words in the struggle. So in other words, he's just recognizing those Black and brown people still trapped in the South Bronx, right, that we saw earlier. So in the struggle, right, this idea that you did nothing wrong, you were just born in, shall we say, the wrong color skin in the wrong neighborhood. And no, it's not the wrong color skin, but in terms of from society, the way it's operating, that's the way it's treating people, right? I mean, whose fault is it if you're born as a Latinx person in a poor urban neighborhood? Sorry, try again, right? Maybe karma's real, try again, right? It's almost like game over, right? It's almost like you have to win the lottery to change that type of lifestyle, right? So to all the N-words in the struggle, that's number 3. Number 2 was to all the people who called the police on me when I was just trying to hustle on the streets to feed my daughter. So again, he's revealing that maybe he would be a good Boy Scout and would participate in society, but he's unable to fit in. So he's resorted to hustling on the streets, i.e. selling drugs, only because he's trying to feed his daughter. Like, where else can I get the money from? I'm applying for a job, and it's this terrible cycle where I don't have enough education, or if I do get a job, it's just horrible minimum wage. Oh, with Dr. G, how come he doesn't take minimum wage? It's for the same reason you don't take minimum wage. That's the reason. For the same reason you don't take minimum wage. If you have a choice, that's the reason. So don't ask me philosophical questions like that. Just ask yourself, how come I'm right? I mean, think about it. What did we say earlier? I mean, you can give up all your possessions right now and start volunteering at the soup kitchen tomorrow. But no, that's not what you're gonna do. You're gonna try to get paid because you kind of sort of need food on your table and gas in your car, and those things cost money. And so he's hinting at that in number 2. But number 1 is the piece I really want to focus on for a second. This is dedicated to who? To all the teachers who told me I would never amount to nothing. Okay. So what you're saying to me is that the very same individuals who are charged and trusted with the responsibility of seeing that which is best in our youth, planting seeds that hopefully will germinate one day, sprout and grow, and yield delicious fruit to benefit society. You're telling me that these same people looked this man in the eye and told him he wouldn't amount to anything? That's violent. It's terrible. It's a travesty. I feel that pain. Why? Even though I stand before you as an associate professor, that means I have tenure, a published author, world traveler with a PhD from Georgetown University, I too was told in 9th grade, despite the fact that I had a 4.0, I would make a good carpenter. Would you believe that? Good thing I didn't listen to that individual, right? And I listened to something else. I listened to another voice. Maybe that voice was hip hop, telling me that maybe I could do it. maybe I'm worth something. Maybe I'm valuable. Maybe I mean something to somebody else. Maybe I should keep pushing. Maybe I should still believe. Maybe I should still hold on for a little bit longer. Maybe that was hip hop. Sometimes I wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for you. Hip hop, you're the love of my life, and it's true. So, in closing, I just want to point out that we still have much work to do. These are the faces of white males who were frustrated with their lot in life, but behaved inappropriately. What do I mean by inappropriately? Well, I mean inappropriately in that all the numbers that you see behind their names are the numbers of people that they shot. So here's what's fascinating. You have these Black hip hop artists who are frustrated with their lot in life. Man, this doesn't seem fair. So what do? They go within. They use their powers of creation to use their words to create a new world. I'm not trying to be funny or keep score, but feel free to email me the list of Black mass shooters, right? I'm not saying that violence doesn't happen. It's only germane to white individuals, but I think this is a particular type of breed. It's kind of interesting that most of the mass shooters that we know, white males, frustrated. But I would call this an inappropriate way to express your frustration. Now, compare that to this. These people are clearly frustrated, but look how they're using the words to create camaraderie and community around this idea that maybe we still have some work to do in society. It's simple. Music, dance, song in unison. What's the problem? These people are frustrated. Remember, you don't live in their neighborhood. You don't live with these people. I mean, after this rally, they still have to stay in their neighborhood. I mean, so no one says anything to you when you get your glass of wine to unwind. So if this is their way of coping with the stress of being in a situation that they didn't ask for or create, I don't have a problem with that. Who am I to regulate how someone can navigate this thing called life? And again, no one's shooting anybody, right? I would call this an appropriate way to channel your frustration in collective unison and voice. So again, I do believe that hip hop is truly sustainable in terms of how it recycles. I think it's often overlooked, and I think so many new artists, right, are still speaking to so many of these ideas about fighting for freedom. You know, when you look at Beyonce, J. Cole, I break chains all by myself. All we want to do is be free. Many of these artists have not forgotten about what we talked about earlier, right? As far as how the party got started. And so I think it's absolutely fascinating that with limited resources, so many in hip hop have done so much. And again, if you think it's easy, again, I encourage you to start writing some rhymes later on today or tonight and see whether you can get crowds of thousands to support you as well. It's not as easy as it looks, because not only do you have to communicate a message, but you have to make it rhyme. And so in closing, even though we have images like this that are still out and about, hip hop in many ways forces us to remix, right? And to look at what we think we know from a different angle, right? And again, I didn't say there's nothing wrong with hip hop. But
Super Nintendo.
but I think there's a lot more under the surface. There's a lot more under the surface for us to appreciate. And so again, if we're going with the principle that hip hop is as wide and deep as the ocean, I think there's really no limit to what humankind can create. And hip hop has shown us, whether it be through stylistic dress, whether it be through vocabulary, whether it be through music techniques pioneered. I think there's no limit to what people can create. And so with that being said, I simply challenge us to think about hip hop as more than just noise, but as a vehicle that helps many to remain inspired, to inquire creatively, think critically, and solve problems. Sometimes I wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for you. Hip hop, you're the love of my life. And it's true. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing so eloquently, this music that has survival at its starting point, and then it moves into redemption and creation. And it's really cool to like have it broken down. And, I get the history is everything. The context is this is where it's coming from. This is exactly it. Thank you so much for sharing everything you shared tonight. And
Thank
hey,
you for
join us next.
sharing. It's very challenging. Really challenging. All of the programs that you've had so far really have caused me to think more. But in terms of the hip hop, I know some of the names, I'm sorry to say, by crossword puzzles. Sometimes the names come up because maybe they fit in a little strange way, but and I have a hard time listening to what the words are saying. So I'm going to try much, much harder to listen to what that message is that those individuals have, because I hear what you're saying, I hear what you're showing us. So thank you.
Well, Jen, let me
Sorry,
just
I
say
couldn't
this.
show my face because I had dermatology work
Oh,
today,
no,
and
no
I got
worries.
bandages all over my face. So sorry.
Well, Joan, first of all, we appreciate you, spending time with us this evening. And secondly, I think that's all we're asking. This idea that you're open to listening. That's all we're asking. And the other piece of advice I would say is that if you find a song that you're interested in listening, you can also look up the lyrics online. Now with the internet, you can pretty much find the lyrics to any song. That way you can hopefully follow along. Because you're right. Sometimes when you're listening, it's just hard to pick it out, especially if it's something that you just have to get accustomed to in terms of that rhythm. But Joan, I think it's worth a shot to give it a try, and I think that's all that we're asking.
Okay, I will. I'll let you know. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
And then for all our viewers out there, we do have the book as well at the Anaheim Public Library, and it gives a lot more detailed suggestions as far as how to think about the lyrics and where they're coming from, and how they are actually taking something that could be a horrible experience, and then finding dignity and finding hope and finding transformation within it. And so anyways, the book helps get through some of the themes if you've got questions about the themes. So join us next month for our 4th presentation in the series. And it's your wild card draw, Dr. G. We will be surprised with what you come up with, and we're looking forward to it, whatever it is. And
Thank you. You're on my calendar. Thank you. Good night.
All
right.
right.
And a quick thank you to the Friends of the Anaheim Public Library for supporting this series. And most especially, again, thank you, Dr. G, for spending time with us. See you next time.
Good night.
Good night.